Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I was on a plane and I had very little else to do, so I watched a couple of movies. And the two movies that I had the chance to watch on my flight were The Accountant, the Ben Affleck film, and Jack Reacher 2, the Tom Cruise movie. It's called Jack Reacher Never Go Back. Now, these movies, interestingly enough, are actually both, they both deal with similar kind of concepts. You've got a lone operative, a lone wolf who is highly skilled in what they do. You have a shadowy conspiracy group that is hunting the lone wolf, and then you have an innocent party that is caught up in this game of cat and mouse, and the highly skilled lone operative has to sort of step out of themselves and step out of their comfort zone, and they, they're used to operating alone. Now they have to actually look after and care for other people. So how did these two movies fare when measured back to back? Well, there really was no comparison. There was this massive and stark difference, I think, in the quality of these two films. First of all, The Accountant, I thought, was a really good and enjoyable action thriller / drama film. It was good. It was great. The theme of autism is very much forms the sort of the hub or the basis of the story and the main character, and I thought that was really well handled. It's not a perfect film. The last 5 minutes or so I felt were just a little bit weak. It sort of almost, it felt like it was starting to preach at that point, whereas before it had focused on telling this good story, and the autism was so well woven into the story that it really drew you into that world and got you thinking about people who experience autism and what life is like for them. The last 5 minutes or so, they felt like a little bit it almost felt like they were feeling like they had to push it, and it felt a little bit like almost like an infomercial for this particular issue. The other thing about The Accountant that I think was weak was the fact that it actually gave away its hand a little too early. There are a couple of important plot twists or plot developments that you actually saw coming far too early in the film, I think. I think they could have held off giving you those couple of important plot twists and plot developments just by little things they could have done differently, which wouldn't have given the game away so very early in the film. But apart from that, it's a really good and enjoyable movie. Jack Reacher, on the other hand, man, it was a chore to get through. Now, let me start by saying I'm not a huge Jack Reacher fan. I'm not a big fan of the books. However, I watched the first film and I actually found it to be an enjoyable movie. There wasn't anything majorly wrong with it. Once again, it's not something that will set the world on fire, but it was a pretty good, enjoyable sort of movie to watch. This film didn't even feel like it was in the same ballpark. This was a film that I think suffered from a whole lot of fundamental problems. I think the story was poorly constructed. There's things that happen in the story that don't really kind of make sense, and what I mean is they don't really gel with the way the plot develops. You'll get these scenes or incidents that all of a sudden will happen and they just don't feel that organic to the story. There's one classic example where they take this young girl to a boarding school to try, and the whole plan is they're going to hide her at this boarding school, but she's literally there for minutes, probably I'd imagine in movie time maybe half an hour. We only see it on screen for a couple of minutes, but maybe a total of half an hour. She was, as far as the story goes, she was at this venue. She literally decides she doesn't want to be there, and so they leave straight away. They leave and take her away again. It's the most pointless side diversion. Now, the reason they did it was because they wanted the young girl to actually steal some credit cards that they could use in the plot. But there are plenty of ways they could have done that without doing that. It just felt like such a pointless sort of diversion in the story. It wasn't something that really served the plot well, and there's several moments like that. The other thing is that this is a movie that really telegraphs what's coming. You can see what's coming well before it comes, and I'm not talking about plot twists, I'm just talking about where the action is going to go, where the story is going to go. You can see this stuff. It just feels so rote and so paint by numbers. It's sort of painfully obvious. Going back again to that scene at the boarding school, as soon as they went to that boarding school, the first thing I thought to myself was, I bet they are going to come back to this boarding school at the very end of the film, and they are going to try and pull a bit of a Leon the Professional, if you've seen that film, where the young girl ends up back at the boarding school at the end, and I bet you they're going to try and do something similar. Sure enough, that is exactly what they do at the end of this film. There are other scenes in which you look at the scene and you think, okay, I know that that guy there is going to get that implement there in his face within the next 2 minutes. There's going to be a fight break out, and Jack Reacher is going to use that implement on this guy, and he's going to swing it in his face. And sure enough, 2 minutes later, that very implement gets swung in his face. It was so obvious and so telegraphed like that it just, when a movie you can really see what's coming constantly, it's just not enjoyable because there's no drama in it anymore. You know exactly what's going to happen. The other thing is that the way the characters are written, there's things they do that just don't quite seem real or realistic. The young girl in particular, like, she's a bit of a teen rebel. There's no doubting that. But she all of a sudden finds herself in the situation where the people, like her equivalent of, I guess, her foster parents, are brutally murdered by this sadistic psychopath. And she witnesses this killing, and she's in hiding in a cupboard. And yet, once that scene has unfolded, she then goes on this journey with Tom Cruise and Cobie Smulders, as if she's someone who has seen this kind of brutal and heinous sadistic murder all the time. It's not consistent. It doesn't really make sense. And it's one thing to have characters sort of do things that, you wouldn't do in real life, that really, people typically would be running scared 100 miles an hour from something, and in a movie they're a bit more composed. But it's another thing altogether to have this character that does things that just seem so totally out of character with how the actual character has been established in the film. It really, once again, it's sort of jarring, and it pulls you out of the film. The other thing is, I think there's some bad casting in this film. I don't think Cobie Smulders was actually good in the role that she had. I get the feeling that what they did was they said, right, who's an actor who has a military look about them? Let's find someone who has that military look to play a military role, rather than saying who's a good actor who could actually carry out this role, and then what we'll do is we'll teach them and train them a few tricks about how to make themselves look, appear, and sound more militaristic. And it's really noticeable. Cobie Smulders, I don't know whether it's just this role or whether, she's not cut out for this type of acting, but she wasn't strong. And I think it didn't work. There was this chemistry between the three main characters that it just felt dysfunctional. There were other characters. There's a military policeman who doesn't feel like once again, he's been cast in the right role. It just doesn't feel like a strong role for him. The way these characters are written too, again, there's Cobie Smulders' character all of a sudden out of nowhere goes on this rant about feminism, and it's literally out of nowhere. It's totally inconsistent to how she's been acting the rest of the film, and bang, it's like being hit on the head with a wet fish. It's so bizarre. In fact, it actually kind of felt like a B movie. This felt like a B movie starring Tom Cruise, which I think is really strange, because Tom Cruise is actually a good actor. Despite the flack that he gets, he is a good actor. And he has starred in some excellent films. And even his sort of mediocre films still tend to be pretty good. But this movie is the exception. It really does feel like a B movie that happens to have an A-list actor, Tom Cruise, in the film. So I guess the $1 million question is, would I be happy if I'd paid to see these two films? If I'd paid to see The Accountant, I'd be pretty happy. I'd walk out of that movie theatre thinking, you know what? I got a pretty good movie experience, and I was happy to part with my hard-earned cash to see that film. Jack Reacher, Never Go Back. I would never go back to this film, and I'd recommend that you don't go anywhere near this film either. Honestly, even if this film was being offered free on television, I would probably still give it a miss. It's not a good film. It's one of those rare occasions where I know that if I'd paid for this film, it's only ever happened to me once before too, in my entire life, where I've walked out of a movie theatre and been so angry and felt like I'd been ripped off and actually wanted a refund. And this movie, I know, would have been one of those films. I would have walked away thinking, what was this film? Now, as I said, I enjoyed the first movie. I thought it was a good film. This one just doesn't hold a candle to it. And maybe if you're a diehard Jack Reacher fan, you might find it more enjoyable, but I doubt that, because I have friends who are diehard Jack Reacher fans and they don't like the direction of these films, so maybe that wouldn't even apply. But all in all, this is, as I said, if I didn't know any better, I'd think that maybe this was some sort of tax write-off for Tom Cruise or for Scientology, or maybe Tom Cruise or whoever owns the rights to this Jack Reacher property has signed some agreement where they have to make a new movie every so many years, and because it just sort of felt like this thing was just painted by numbers, and they had just put a formula together, not very well, and then they just punched out this film in a cookie cutter. It just does not feel like a good film at all. So there you have it. Jack Reacher and The Accountant. The Accountant wins hands down. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.